Episode 24, The Many Minds of Billy Milligan. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my last episode on Wendigo and Skinwalkers. I hope you didn't feel like it was a bait and switch because they're not Appalachian, but people think they are, so maybe I've cleared it up a bit, or maybe just muddy the waters. I don't know. To be honest, I wasn't even sure until I did it all what it was about, and I'm still not positive. But today, let's look at something that definitely happened. We're going to talk about Billy Milligan. Some of my listeners that were alive in the 70s may remember him. I know some of my local listeners may remember him too, as he was probably the most famous patient that was at the Athens State Hospital, also known as the Athens Lunatic Asylum. The movie Split is loosely based on him, very, very loosely. I also remember a couple years ago watching a documentary on Netflix about him. So you may have heard of him, maybe not, but let's go into his story. Billy Milligan isn't quite Appalachian, or his crimes weren't in Appalachia, but he spent part of his childhood in Pickaway County, which is in Appalachia, and Fairfield County, which feels like Appalachia. And since he spent some time in Athens, I'm going to include it in this podcast, because I make the rules around here, and sometimes the rules can be bent. So who is Billy Milligan, and what is his story? Billy Milligan was born William Stanley Morrison on February 14, 1955 in Miami Beach, to Dorothy Pauline Sands and Johnny Morrison. There were no problems at birth, but on March 22, 1955, he was admitted to Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami for treatment of continuous crying and vomiting. Could that be a predictor for things to come? I don't know. We'll find out. Dorothy grew up in Ohio farm country, and lived in Lancaster. Yes, in Ohio it's pronounced Lancaster and not Lancaster. Many of the towns in Ohio have weird pronunciations. It's an Ohio thing, I think. Or maybe it's an Appalachia thing, too, because there are a lot of weird towns pronunciations. But I digress. Dorothy lived in Lancaster with her first husband. They divorced, and Dorothy eventually moved to the Miami area, where she worked as a singer. There she began living with Johnny Morrison. Dorothy and Morrison had two other children, a son, Jim, born in October 1953, and a daughter, Kathy Jo, born in December 1956. Morrison struggled with fatherhood, and according to Daniel Keyes, meeting the medical expenses overwhelmed Johnny. He borrowed more and gambled more, drank more. He was hospitalized for acute alcoholism and depression in 1958. What appeared to be a suicide attempt, according to Keyes, Dorothy found him slumped over the table, half a bottle of scotch and an empty bottle of sleeping pills on the floor. A few months after his attempt on January 17, 1959, Johnny died by suicide from carbon monoxide poisoning. Dorothy took her children and moved away from Miami, eventually returning to Lancaster, Ohio. There, she remarried her ex-husband. This marriage lasted about a year. In 1962, she met Chalmer Milligan. Chalmer's first wife, Bernice, divorced him on the grounds of gross neglect. So it seems like Dorothy isn't so good at picking her men. Chalmer had a daughter, Chala, the same age as Billy, and another daughter who was a nurse. Dorothy and Chalmer married in Circleville, Ohio on October 27, 1963. Chalmer had adopted Dorothy's children and legally changed their surnames from Morrison to Milligan. Chalmer Milligan was not a good stepfather. At his later trial, Chalmer was blamed for abusing Billy. In April 1964, psychiatrists say Chalmer Milligan first sodomizes Billy, age 9, on a family farm, causing Billy's personality to splinter. This is a claim that his mother and brother support, although some doctors claim that Billy had multiple personalities from a much earlier age. However, with his first three, No Name Boy, Christine, and Sean, appearing by the time that he was 5 years old. Current understanding of dissociative identity disorder states that the illness often arises from severe childhood trauma, like those Milligan described. It's a coping mechanism to deal with the pain. The notion is there's something going on in this person's life that is so psychologically unattainable that I can't look at it, I can't think about it, I can't deal with it. So I literally split off a piece of my personality and develop a piece of personality to manage the particular element of my life. As Milligan grew up, his mental health problems manifested in startling ways. Keyes wrote that Milligan frequently lost time as he switched between personalities, waking up at home in the middle class or in a different state with no idea how he got there. At school, Billy was a poor student who behaved strangely. According to his teachers, by the time he was 12 or 13, he sometimes appeared to be in trance-like states. Because of his odd and disruptive behavior, Billy was suspended from school. Dr. Harold Brown, who has declined to comment on the case, examined Billy in the Fairfield County Mental Health Clinic and diagnosed him as having hysterical neurosis with passive-aggressive features. Brown also recommended that Billy be admitted to the Children's Unit of Columbus State Institute. Milligan was a patient from March 23rd to June 23rd, 1970. On June 23rd, Billy was discharged from the hospital for being disrupted, which is ridiculous. I mean, obviously he had problems. I don't understand why they would discharge him for being disrupted. Whatever. But he was urged to seek outpatient treatment. In the fall of 1970, Billy entered Lancaster High School and took a series of short-lived jobs, including delivering groceries and arranging flowers. In 1971 or 72, I couldn't tell for sure which, it didn't really clarify which year, but he was expelled from high school for his involvement in a bomb threat. But in March of 1972, Billy, 17, enlists in the Navy after being expelled from high school. However, by May 1st, he was discharged for erratic and unruly behavior. They said that he did not possess the necessary degree of adaptability for naval life. On July 8, 1972, Billy and a friend were arrested in Circleville on charges of kidnapping, rape, and assault. The kidnapping charges were later dropped. He was sent to Zanesville detention camp for teenage boys after being convicted of rape, though he said it was a false conviction. Milligan claimed the woman involved in the crime was a prostitute who demanded payment for a sexual act he did not perform. After he was released, he claimed he worked as a security guard for a drug dealer. On May 27, 1975, Milligan was sentenced on charges of robbery. One robbery occurred at a Gray drugstore and Plaza Shopping Center in Lancaster, the other at a roadside rest along U.S. Route 33. Milligan was sentenced to 6 to 25 years for the offense and 2 to 5 years for the second offense. He claimed that in the rest stop robbery, he was approached by two homosexual transvestites. That's what they're saying, not what I'm calling them. And he panicked. According to an article in the Columbus Citizen Journal, after Milligan was sent to prison, his attorney applied for shock probation. The Fairfield County Court granted it in the Gray robbery, but not in the other. At the Lebanon Correctional Institute, Milligan had difficulty sleeping, vomited frequently, and suffered from blurred vision. According to Hardy's report, while at Lebanon, Milligan's exposed drug dealings there and had to be kept in protective isolation for 9 months. He was released on parole in 1977. According to a Fairfield County prosecuting attorney, James W. Luce, once released, Milligan quickly violated the terms of parole by not reporting to a parole officer. However, Milligan did manage to land a factory job, which he soon lost. Following a reported argument between Milligan and his current stepfather, Bill jumped to his car and drove to Columbus, where he wandered about for almost a week before getting a job as a maintenance worker at Channing Way Apartments on the Far East Side. He was fired from that job on October 2, 1977 for irresponsibility. Attempts to land jobs at other apartment complexes, such as the Cliffs, failed. Increasingly worried, according to Harding's report, Milligan began to take 3 or 4 20-milligram biphetamine tablets to feel more alert, also combined with vodka and gin or rum to feel better. In October of 1977, Ohio State University was in a state of fear. In the space of 10 days, 3 women had been attacked, robbed at gunpoint, and raped. On October 14th, an optometry student is kidnapped from Ohio State University parking lot, raped, and robbed. On October 22nd, a nurse is kidnapped from campus, raped, and robbed. And on October 26th, an OSU undergraduate is kidnapped, raped, and robbed. Ohio State University was in a state of fear. In the space of 10 days, 3 women had been attacked, robbed at gunpoint, and raped. The student union organized volunteers to walk women back across the sprawling campus. After buzzing with anti-Vietnam War sentiment, now the university politics turned to female safety. Angry protests erupted. The press dubbed the attacker as the campus rapist. The 3 of the rapes, all committed within 2 weeks prior to the arrest date, were remarkably similar. A woman would be approached near the OSU campus, taken at gunpoint to a rural area, and raped. The rapist then forced the victims to use checks or credit cards to obtain cash. The victim would later be released without further harm, but the rapist would take her name and perhaps those of some relatives. He threatened retaliation if he was reported. When police searched Milligan's Far East Side apartment on the 27th, they found handcuffs, a gun, a stolen MasterCharge card, and jogging outfit. Those and other items linked him to several rapes. A few weeks later, the police had a breakthrough. The man had fingerprints on the windscreen of the victim's car. They matched a known suspect in a database. Another victim was able to identify him as in a lineup. They had their man, Billy Milligan, a 23-year-old registered sex offender who had already served time in Ohio State Prison and juvenile corrections facilities for robbery and sexual assault. Police arrested Milligan soon after he was identified. He was meek and unspeaking. The walls of his apartment were plastered with artwork of extraordinary quality, leading the arresting officers to question whether he had painted himself or stolen them. He also claimed to have planted a bomb. It turned out to be fake, a shoebox snared with wires. No explosives were found. When he was arrested for the serial rapes, Milligan claimed to have no memory of the assaults. Furthermore, his personality and mannerisms seemed to change drastically and constantly. It was the uncontested rapes that brought up some disturbing questions. According to psychiatrists, the rapes were committed by Adelina, a curious lesbian. The robberies were the work of the sinister Reagan, and the money was turned over to Arthur, who paid the bills. But at least one victim made a point of saying that there was no personality change during the rapes, and that the assailant did not speak with an accent, as Reagan did. In fact, the personality described didn't seem to match any of the previously discovered by psychiatrists. On more than one occasion during the rapes, Milligan claimed that his name was Phil and made a point of telling the victims that he was Jewish. Milligan also told the rape victims, among other things, that he was a member of the Radical Weathermen, that he just killed 3 people, that he was leaving for Algiers, and that he had Huntington's disease. According to one rape victim, he said he led a double life. In one identity, he claimed to be a wealthy businessman who drove a Maserati and who had a large house 3 miles from the sea. He also told one victim that if she were asked, she should tell the police that her assailant was Carlos the Jackal, the infamous terrorist linked with the assorted international incidents, including the massacre of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics. Since he used a gun during the crime and the guns were found in search of his residence, he had violated his parole as well. He was indicted on 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of aggravated robbery, and 4 counts of rape. He was placed in the Ohio State Penitentiary pending trial. In the course of preparing his defense, he underwent a psychological examination by Dr. Willis C. Driscoll, who diagnosed Milligan with schizophrenia. He was then examined by psychologist Dorothy Turner, a Southwest Community Mental Health Center in Columbus, Ohio. During the examination, Turner concluded that Milligan had dissociative identity disorder. Milligan's public defenders, Gary Swikart and Judy Stevenson, pled an insanity defense and he was committed until such time as he regained sanity. This was in 1978. People magazine and Newsweek, among other national media outlets, published stories about Billy. Daniel Keyes began interviewing him for a book. Before his trial, he appeared lost and scared. "I don't know why they're saying I've done these things," he told his sister when she visited him. He was like a little boy, she recalls in the documentary. He drew incessantly, the art veering wildly in subject and quality as though it were done by different people. A common image emerged, though, a rag doll hanging from its neck, dead. After a few nights, Milligan tried to commit suicide. He tore the urinal off his wall and tried to slash his wrists with his porcelain shards. The prison authorities subjected him to a barrage of IQ and ECG tests. They showed odd divergences, too. Sometimes Milligan's IQ registered as low functioning, other times it appeared borderline genius. ECGs, meanwhile, suggested his brain waves fluctuated in age from that of a small child to the grown man he was. These interesting results drew the attention of Dr. George Harding, who ran the nearby Harding Hospital, one of America's foremost psychiatric institutions. Unusually, the presiding judge gave Harding 3 months to get to the bottom of Milligan's mental state and transferred him to Harding Hospital. Dr. Harding examined him alongside another psychiatrist, Dr. Cornelia Wilbur. Wilbur had shot to fame 5 years earlier when a novel for her patient Flora Rita Schreiber's Sybil became a bestseller. Written in collaboration with Wilbur and her patient, Sybil dramatized the experiences of a woman who claimed to have 16 different personalities living in her. It became a TV movie starring Sally Field and brought the idea of multiple personality disorder. And since 1994, it's been referred to as dissociative identity disorder, DID. In the public eye, under examination, Milligan switched between accents, voices, and mannerisms. These changes were often accompanied by medium-like theatrics, long periods of silence, eye rolls, and eyelid fluttering. Harding and Wilbur were soon convinced Milligan had DID, dissociative identity disorder. Milligan's radical shifts in personality were enough to convince the court that he could not understand right and wrong or cooperate fully with his attorney. His defendants pleaded guilty on reason of his sanity. And in October 1978, he was exculpated of his criminal charges and committed to mental institutions until such time as he regained his sanity. According to the court documents, he was the first defendant to successfully use DID to evade criminal charge. Milligan's trial was the first in which a defendant was found not guilty by reason of insanity on the basis of multiple personality disorder, which, like I said, today is called DID. According to his doctors, severe physical and sexual abuse inflicted on Billy in his childhood by means of his stepfather, Chalmer Milligan, caused his personality to splinter into 10, and later as many as 24 separate personalities that had little knowledge of the other's actions. At trial and in the docuseries, Milligan's mother, sister, and brother all attest to the brutal, abusive nature of Chalmer Milligan, who always denied the allegations against him. Chalmer Milligan died in 1988 at the age of 61. Milligan's personalities differed in their behavior and even had different accents. There was Arthur, a sophisticated expert in science and medicine. When he would come out, Milligan would speak in a British accent. There was Regan Vadaskovanik, the keeper of hate. He had a Slavic accent. The alters also ranged in age and gender, including 8-year-old David, 3-year-old Christine, and Adelena, a lesbian. Milligan revealed that he hadn't committed any of the crimes at all. It was Reagan that had stolen the money and Adelena who had raped the women. Milligan said that his core personality, Billy, was buried after a suicide attempt at age 16. His mind fragmented and his alters took ownership by means of self-preservation. If they had maintained control, he wouldn't try to blot out his traumatic memories by taking his life. One of the experts called into the Milligan case is Dr. Cornelia Wilbur of Lexington, Kentucky. She's the one that I said had discovered Sybil. Wilbur says that in a 2-hour period, she saw 4 alternate personalities and Bill himself. The last was a brief interview. Wilbur recalls the other personalities were worried that Billy was suicidal. They had to be persuaded to let Bill wake up. When that happened, Wilbur said, "Billy scuttled across the room. I've never seen anyone so frightened," he said. "Every time I come to, I'm in trouble." Wilbur says that in multiple personality cases, there's always amnesia. She says that before therapy, the core or original personality remembers some of the acts of the other personalities or is aware of their existence, then something is fishy. A male relative of one of the rape victims called the multiple personality theory bullshit. He sat quietly through the trial, then later grumbled, "The media is making a folk hero out of this guy. It's the Sam Shepard case in reverse." Side note here, I just wanted to very briefly let you know who Sam Shepard is, in case you didn't. He was convicted of the 1954 murder of his pregnant wife, Marilyn Reese Shepard. But the conviction was eventually overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, which cited a carnival atmosphere at the trial. Shepard was acquitted at a retrial in 1966. He's also the inspiration for the television series and the movie The Fugitive. But back to Billy. The case had taken such a spectacular twist that the rape victims and the crimes against them were almost forgotten. The world was interested in Milligan's psyche. The victims' relatives was not alone in his doubt, though a number of prominent psychiatrists expressed concern, both over the public's perception of the multiple personality phenomenon generally, and specifically over the fact that this analysis had been used to have Milligan declared not guilty. And that is it's unfortunate that those victims were just kind of swept by the wayside. I mean, what happened to them, and it's just not right. But While the claim of multiple personalities was controversial and groundbreaking at the time, the jury believed it enough to find Milligan not guilty by reason of insanity. They made him the very first person in American history to successfully use multiple personality disorder as a defense for violence in court. Later, psychiatrist Dr. Dorothy Lewis testified as an expert witness for several murders, including a serial killer, Arthur Shawcross, in 1990. Her work has since been widely criticized, and renowned forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz, who consulted for both the FBI and CIA, claimed under oath during Shawcross's trial that he felt Lewis was inviting Shawcross to play various roles. Many people now believe that Milligan was playing various roles as well. But Billy Milligan was found unfit to stand trial and was sent to Athens State Hospital in Athens, Ohio, and several other state hospitals. While there, by his report, he received very little help. While he was in those hospitals, Milligan reported having 10 different personalities. These 10 were the only ones known to psychologists. Later on, an additional 14 personalities labeled the undesirables were claimed. While Milligan spent years in psychiatric institution, while remaining a source of public wonder as people tried to determine the truth, was he actually controlled by multiple personalities, or was he merely finding a way out of responsibility for his crimes? Interviews with Milligan's family, friends, doctors, and investigators attempt to get to the bottom of the story in Monsters Inside, which also focuses on his complicated life post-trial. Milligan began selling his paintings from the psychiatric ward for upwards of thousands of dollars. He also became the subject of a 1981 book called The Minds of Billy Milligan, written by best-selling Flowers for Algernon author Daniel Keyes. Both resulted in discourse about the morality of criminals profiting from their infamy. One hospital was also criticized for allegedly favoring Milligan for giving him unsupervised furloughs just 2 years after the rapes. Side note, I've never read The Minds of Billy Milligan, but I did read Flowers for Algernon, and it was such a good book. There's a movie based on it called Charlie, but I've never seen it. But I may have to check out The Minds of Billy Milligan. While in the facilities, Milligan received treatment from psychiatrist David Call, MD, who diagnosed the additional 14 personalities. After his internment in 1978, Milligan spent more than a decade in and out of mental hospitals, yet his celebrity attracted favorable treatment. Psychiatrists took up his case, securing easier living conditions, allowing him to come and go as he pleased. With one hospital giving him unsupervised furloughs for just 2 years after the rapes, he was even able to own a car and a farm. I feel like if Billy Milligan really had these issues, that the 10 years of institutionalization in jails and psychiatric hospitals that followed Billy Milligan's trial didn't help him a bit. They didn't seem to treat him, and they just kind of treated him as their pet. He was a popular prisoner or patient. He proved to be a security risk. He escaped from Ohio State Psychiatric Hospital in 1986 with the help of his friend Jim, recording video testimonies for a local news channel to complain about the treatment inside. While on the run, he worked for a hot tub business in Washington State during that time. Milligan obtained fake documents under the name Christopher Carr and settled in Bellingham, Washington. While Milligan's roommate, Michael Madden, went missing on September 1986, Milligan left the state and was soon after captured by police in Florida. No one has ever been convicted in the disappearance of Michael Madden, but many of his possessions were found in Milligan's apartment, and Milligan had been cashing Madden's disability checks in a shared bank account. After his arrest, Milligan was taken back to Ohio and institutionalized again. In 1988, after an assessment by an independent psychiatrist concluded that Milligan was not a danger to society, he was released. I mean, how was he not a danger to society? Why didn't they look into the missing roommate? I mean, it makes no sense to me. Obviously something happened to the guy. But Milligan was released from all psychiatric wards in 1988 after psychiatrists determined that Milligan's personalities had fused and he was back to his core self. He was released from all supervision in 1991. Some believe Milligan was an impressive con man, and the others a troubled product of severe child abuse. Regardless, Milligan's violence impacted several innocent lives. In Dr. Lewis's opinion, the best way to prevent this kind of violent crime that is seen in Milligan's case is to prevent child abuse. To produce the repeatedly aggressive individual, usually there's a history of early, ongoing, intolerable abuse in one sort or the other, and some of the quirkiness about his or her brain. In 1996, he lived in California, where he owned Stormy Life Productions and was going to make a short film, which apparently was never made. His location thereafter remained for a long time unknown, his former acquaintances having lost contact with him. According to his sister, he had been living in property in Ohio when he was diagnosed with cancer in 2012, and he lived with her for the remainder of his life. He died in a nursing home in Columbus of cancer in 2014 at the age of 59. According to the Los Angeles Times, the Columbus Dispatch reported his sister confirmed his death, saying, "He died last Friday of cancer. I believe he finally is at peace." So, what do you think? Did Billy Milligan have the ID, or was he just a good con man? I don't know. As I said with Paul Dennis Reed episode, regardless of either, they're still victims of their crimes they committed, and the victims and their families deserve justice too. It's really hard to know what to do in these cases. I just don't know. It's a conundrum. So, because I mentioned the Athens State Hospital in the episode, and I may not get a chance to cover it again, I'm going to talk about it for a short moment here. The Athens Lunatic Asylum, now a mixed-use development known as the Ridges, was a Kirkbride-planned mental hospital operated in Athens, Ohio, from 1874 to 1993. During its operation, the hospital provides services to a variety of patients, including Civil War veterans, children, and those declared mentally unwell. After a period of disuse, the property was redeveloped by the state of Ohio. Today, the Ridges are a part of Ohio University and house the Kennedy Museum of Art, as well as an auditorium and many offices, classrooms, and storage facilities. If you remember from my episode about the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, it was a Kirkbride-planned mental hospital too. I go into a lot more detail in that episode, but they were made to give patients the best care possible. Unfortunately, places like this tend to get overcrowded and their intentions do not come to fruition. The following information I got from the Ohio University website. Landscape architect Herman Harlan from Cincinnati worked with Athens gardener George Link to create a park-like setting of approximately 60 acres. By the early 20th century, there were 4 ponds, a waterfall, paths of large variety and types of trees, plants, and flowers. But by the turn of the century, mental health advocates were beginning to advocate a different physical plan for treatment of the mentally ill, the cottage plan. The gaining popularity of this movement is evident from the number of independent buildings constructed during the first decade of the 20th century. The facility adapted to evolving theories of the best practices for treating mental health patients, and in the 1940s, the facility was renamed the Athens State Hospital. Many mysteries surround the asylum due to the secrecy and lack of information surrounding patients who were treated there. What is known is that there are 1,930 people buried across 3 cemeteries located at the Ridges. Most of these people were patients who were unclaimed by their families and are marked only with a number, their names dying with them, a truly heartbreaking thought. By the 1980s, the cemeteries were no longer being taken care of, and vandalism as well as natural weathering caused irreparable damage. These days, the National Alliance on Mental Illness is working to gather information about the patients buried there and to restore their headstones and the cemetery as a whole, bringing their memory back to the forefront. This site is cherished by the local community, as many residents have family members that worked at the Ridges or were patients there. The community and county residents use the grounds of the Ridges as a public park, and many have fond memories of picnicking and going to see the alligator that once resided in the fountain at the Ridges. By the 1980s, treatment for the mentally ill changed radically and moved away from institutionalization towards treatment in the community, either as outpatients or in smaller group homes placed in residential neighborhood settings. The course of action led to the closing of the Athens State Hospital complex and discussion of its possible demolition. Instead, the state of Ohio transferred the property to Ohio University, which has been gradually upgrading the buildings as new uses are found for the space. The Ridges is now used as part of the Ohio State University for educational facilities and administrative offices, but it's also used by the community. They have an art museum, a childhood development center, among other things. And as with any facility like this, of course there are stories of it being haunted, but I really couldn't find a lot about that. There are several ways you can experience the Ridges, including historical walking tours, hiking trails, and public telescope nights in the Ohio University Observatory. There are even self-guided tours that anyone with a cell phone can do by following GPS instructions while learning about each stop along the way. if you're ever near Athens, it's a cool little town. I think it's cool, at least. It's a little hippie oasis in the middle of the Appalachian desert. So it's a fun place to visit. It's definitely a different place than the rest of Appalachia. For me, it's about a 40-minute drive. So, I go up there a lot just for shopping and stuff too. So, but anyways, I guess that's about it for today's episode. As always, thanks for listening. Follow me on socials under Poison Appalachia. Check out my website, poisonappalachia.com. Like and rate me on whatever podcast platform you listen to, and if you can do that, and then tell your friends about me, please. I want to really grow this podcast this year, so maybe together we can do that. Talk to y'all next week. Bye.